8 quarters of football, 2 games, a 4-point deficit overall for Notre Dame, and now an 0-2 start to the Irish season, a season that began with Notre Dame ranked number 6 in the country. He is Drew Mintock. I'm John Bryce. This is Irish Illustrated's Overtime Live. Welcome to the show. Drew, we've given out some of our initial thoughts on Irish Illustrated's instant analysis, but your initial thoughts on this come-from-ahead loss for Notre Dame, the Irish's 3rd consecutive loss.
Yeah, I mean, this one honestly feels a little different than the Miami loss, where I think there were some very obvious noticeable mistakes that cost them, but today felt much more consistent, where throughout the game, every time Notre Dame would seemingly get ahead or get momentum back, this time it seemed like they, rather than Miami, which I felt like made a lot of plays to kind of get themselves in there, it felt like Notre Dame would give those up to Texas A&M, and just a lot of uncharacteristic things. And I think this one, even though it was only by 1 point, feels much more concerning, I think, than the last, if I'm being perfectly honest, just kind of from the litany of mistakes. And they kind of made it on all 3 phases and in so many different ways that I think somebody in the story I published asked me, talk me off the ledge after this. And I think it's fair to be concerned. This is a game they definitely should have won. They just needed to not give up any number of big plays, and they couldn't come away with it at the end. Obviously, I think we're going to talk about the video you just posted on your Twitter feed, John Bryce, where there's a clear hold on Heinisch at the end there that maybe could have changed things, but ultimately Notre Dame shouldn't have been in a position for that type of thing to matter.
Yeah, I don't know any better way to put it. You like your chances if you're Notre Dame, if that hold is called and Texas A&M has to try and score a touchdown on 4th and goal from the 21. You feel really good about that, especially if you remember the pain of 2 years ago in a similar loss to Ohio State. But this Texas A&M team is not remotely as talented as that Ohio State team. This is supposed to be a more mature Notre Dame football program, and we didn't see it, and we'll have more on that. But I mean more mature in its play and more mature in its composure, and I know Tim O'Malley will join us in a few minutes for that. Again, he's Drew Mintock of Irish Illustrated, John Bryce of FootballScoop.com, and Irish Illustrated here on Irish Illustrated's Overtime Live. We have a number of talking points to get to, but I probably want to start, Drew, with what Notre Dame's defense allowed, especially 21 points in the second quarter at home. How many times did Notre Dame even allow 21 points in a game last year? It wasn't many, let alone 21 points at home in a single quarter. Just really abysmal.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I think the way they did it, I mean, Notre Dame the last 2 years had the number 1 pass efficiency defense in the country, and that was the Achilles heel for especially that side of the ball today. Notre Dame has given up 360 yards now 3 times and since Marcus Freeman arrived. The first one was Oklahoma State in the Fiesta Bowl, and then last year against USC. So this was a highly unprecedented performance, especially considered 258 of those yards from Marcel Reed came in the first half, and a lot of those, as you said, in the second quarter. And those 2 big plays, I think one was for 45, the other one was the 86-yard touchdown. Those are, obviously 2 plays over 40 yards passing. Notre Dame gave up 6 in 16 games last year. So just giving up those big chunk plays. Marcel Reed wasn't efficient, but he got so many big plays that it made sense for them to keep kind of having him push the ball down the field. And he honestly missed a lot of throws. There's a lot of Texas A&M receivers that had a few steps on guys that he just overthrew, and sometimes there wasn't even safety help. So if those plays were complete, they might have been big touchdowns too.
Yeah, missed a lot of throws. Notre Dame, again, busted a lot of coverages. We heard Marcus Freeman say post-game, played a lot of zone early, had 6 guys coming after the quarterback, didn't really affect him. Your rush obviously impacts your coverage. Notre Dame's coverage has just been disastrous through 2 games, and people are talking about it being overrated or Notre Dame's talent being overrated. I don't think Notre Dame's talent is overrated. I don't think Notre Dame's players in the secondary particularly are playing up to their talent for whatever reason. Are they impaired by the scheme? Are they thinking too much? We don't know those answers. We know that Marcus Freeman hadn't even discussed with Tyler Buckner what happened on the hold, because he was asked point blank, what did Tyler say happened on that? And he was like, I don't know. I haven't talked to him. I was like, well, I didn't know if you talked. He said I was on to to the defensive series. That's the thing. And I said, well, I didn't know if you talked to him in the locker room. He said no. So again, it's the second three-game losing streak in Marcus Freeman's career, but this one feels so much different. And this one feels like a team again that established so much last year and did so much for the Notre Dame program from a national respect standpoint. I think it's fairly eroded through 2 games. Drew, your thoughts there?
Yeah, I agree. I think obviously it was more understandable. Obviously, the Marshall loss felt a little different in 2022, but it was his first. He was a first-time head coach. This is like I mean, Nick Saban said it today in College Game Day. Like he thought Notre Dame was going to go 11-0 the rest of the way because of Marcus Freeman and kind of the traits he had instilled in this program from a physicality standpoint, from just like that kind of maturity in terms of letting things go after big mistakes. And today, like those things really seem to kind of pile on. We mentioned like the secondary. I mean, Christian Gray, who's now a second-year starter, he's a junior. Like I think he made pretty much every type of mistake today, from some careless penalties to getting beat on some moves deep to missing a tackle on the 86-yard touchdown that like he should have stopped that at midfield. Had an interception fall through his hands. Just little bits of everything that it has nothing to do with his talent. Like he should be better than he was last year. And this is a former, borderline top 100 prospect. It's just unclear why players like that aren't living up to the growth that we had expected coming into the season.
And one of the things that Notre Dame did so remarkably well among many last year en route to that championship game appearance, Drew, we talked about it a lot all last season. We wrote stories about it. We tweeted about it. The middle eight. And Notre Dame, nobody in college football last year, there's no hyperbole, nobody in college football was better. Nobody was remotely as close to as good as Notre Dame. Through 15 games last year, so through the Penn State Orange Bowl victory, Notre Dame had a 155-13 edge in the middle eight. Of course, that's the last 4 minutes of the first half, the first 4 minutes of the second half. This year, however, Notre Dame has been blanked in the middle eight and given up 14 points, 7 apiece at Miami, and tonight against Texas A&M. Take it back to the title game when Ohio State outscored them 14-0 in the middle eight. I find it hardly a coincidence that Notre Dame has a 3-game losing streak and that it's been outscored 28-0 in the middle eight during that 3 games. And again, that's an area that Marcus Freeman has emphasized. That's an area that Notre Dame has taken pride in, and that's an area that Notre Dame suddenly is failing in dramatically, Drew.
Yeah, absolutely. And you even look at specifically today, like Notre Dame had the ball late in the second quarter and they kind of stalled on that last drive. And then they obviously had that really bad play where they were trying to just take the delay game penalty, and CJ Carr clapped when he clearly wasn't supposed to, and Ashton Craig snapped the ball, and it kind of put Texas A&M in a chance. They didn't convert on that long field goal, but they should have never had a chance to do anything like that. And then Notre Dame received the ball to start the second half and didn't come away with anything either. So those were multiple instances where they could have either given Texas A&M, either picked up points themselves or given Texas A&M at least 3 more points in that middle eight. That's just not the type of thing we saw last year.
No, not at all. As we go through a number of different things, and we're going to talk about tackles for losses, we're going to talk about turnovers. I know another note that I think is very important in this game is that technically Notre Dame scored more points off turnovers than A&M, 7-3, and Notre Dame had a more than 6-minute edge of time of possession, again, at home. All of these things in Notre Dame's favor, and Notre Dame found a way to lose this game every bit as much as Texas A&M found a way to win this game. Drew, what are some of the other elements about this contest tonight that really stood out to you?
Yeah, I mean, I think another thing is, I mean, you mentioned like the tackles for loss and stuff. I think we were talking about before. If you look at negative plays and turnovers, Notre Dame has Miami and Texas A&M combined, I think, have 16 either negative plays or turnovers against Notre Dame, and Notre Dame only has 6 themselves combined in 2 games. Like that's definitely those type of havoc plays. They're definitely not the type of thing we saw last year. I think they either led or were leading through most of the season. Turnovers forced last year, like that's something they thrived in. They only have 1 in this year. They've turned the ball over 3 times. They're just not. I mean, they have 1 sack, and that was against Miami late, at a time that could have mattered, but still wasn't like the most pivotal time. Like they've kind of come up short in a lot of those kind of game-breaking plays. So, and I think that's important to note because as much as we've kind of hammered the pass defense today, it's really hard when they're not putting them in those negative positions or really generating pressure or anything like that too. So it does make that a big difference. Whereas at least last year, I think even if they weren't leading the nation in sacks or anything, they at least generated pressure more consistently last year, especially up the middle when you had guys like Howard Cross and Riley Mills. And we're just not seeing that often until I guess the hold on Heinisch. We haven't seen that much this year.
Yeah, and I should note, I think I gave Tom, our fantastic producer, slightly wrong information. I was double checking my own math here. Math is why I'm a writer. And Notre Dame opponents actually have 13 TFLs through 2 games. Notre Dame only has 4. I was giving Notre Dame a little too much credit. I thought they'd had 3 against Miami, but the Irish only had 2 TFLs against Miami, 2 more tonight. They've given up 13. Again, a tremendous recipe for disaster for Notre Dame. And Drew, I think the question has to be asked here, and we'll be joined momentarily by Tim O'Malley here on Irish Illustrated's Overtime Live. Again, I'm John Bryce of FootballScoop.com with Drew Mintock of Irish Illustrated. But as we get joined by Tim O'Malley very shortly, where does Notre Dame go from here? There is no conference championship that they can say we can still win that and get an automatic playoff berth. There's not a great number of quality opponents left on Notre Dame's schedule. And I would contend most importantly is that, yes, they reeled off 13 consecutive wins a year ago after a galling loss at home to Northern Illinois. There's nothing about this team that I've seen so far that makes me believe it can win 10 straight games. It has the talent to win 10 straight games. But through 2 games and 8 quarters, we've seen nothing that makes me believe they can now win 10 in a row.
Yeah, I agree. I think the level of resiliency, you want to at least see that in the game to a degree, and we're not seeing that on the game to think that they're going to bounce back and suddenly play at that level. And I do think so. The Athletic before the game published a story that said if Notre Dame loses, their chance of making the playoffs only dropped from 63% to 42%. In my opinion, that seems a little bit high, if I'm being perfectly honest. I think they could definitely win out. But even then, I think there's going to be a degree where are they going to have any quality wins? What's that ultimately going to look like? And they certainly don't control their own destiny in this instance. They definitely need to hope there's some more chaos out there, and they then also go undefeated, that they can still get into that spot. But there's unless USC turns out to be pretty good or somebody else kind of gets in there to give them that top 20 quality win that they can help. Again, that's not something they control, and that they're going to need that type of help.
I want to point this out as we talk about the great discrepancy in TFLs and how very terrible Notre Dame has been in amassing TFLs while also giving up its own TFLs. And I want to add to it now. It was some research here. Ohio State, going back to that title game, had 7 TFLs. So in its last 3 games, Notre Dame has been tackled behind its own line of scrimmage 20 times. 20 times. They only had 58 plays at Miami. They had a little bit more than that tonight, 71, I believe. But when you're tackled behind the line of scrimmage that much, and we noted that that Notre Dame thus far only has 4, and they did have 5 against Ohio State, but there's still it's a 20-9 deficit for Notre Dame in TFLs. Again, during this 3-game losing streak. And you can't lose 3 games in a row in a 16-game season if you've not made it all the way to the national championship. So we don't diminish that. But we also can't ignore the fact that Notre Dame now has lost 3 games in a row. Drew, any other statistics or nuggets from tonight's game that you specifically want to touch on as we sort of go over the postmortem here of another brutal Notre Dame loss?
I think it's worth noting that if you would have told me 3 weeks ago that Notre Dame was going to start 0-2, I would have assumed that was a bad sign for how CJ Carr kind of got things going. And he has over 500 yards passing. He's completed 63% of his passes in both games. He's made some mistakes you don't want him to make, including, I think he said 3 intentional grounding penalties. He's had some mistakes, but overall, I think he's exceeded my expectations of what I expected from him. He bounces back after He's thrown 2 picks. Both are kind of tip balls. I mean, I think today was maybe a little more on him, but I wouldn't have thought that he would play this well and they would be doing this poorly and drop their first 2 games. And I think that's worth noting that he has kind of lived up to that, and they've kind of came up short in some areas that we were definitely taking for granted.
Yeah, as we prepared for this show, and the Notre Dame press box will be closing soon, so I don't think Tim O'Malley is going to be able to join us. But as we prepared for this show tonight, Drew, we talked about C.J. Carr off air, and we said very specifically, nothing about C.J. Carr is why Notre Dame is 0-2. And beyond that, listen to what Jeremiah Love said about him tonight, and he said, I see greatness in C.J. Carr. I think he's got a chance to be one of the best quarterbacks anywhere in college football in America. I see greatness. He reiterated that multiple times. He loves the way that C.J. Carr competes. I thought C.J. Carr flashed some leadership tonight in his postgame. First of all, coming into postgame, he deserves credit for that. Second of all, he came in there and talked about how his mistake before half when he admitted, quote, I was pissed off and clapped my hands, and the center thought that meant to snap the ball. Thankfully for the Irish, Jeremiah Love pounced on it. Texas A&M missed a field goal. Didn't cost them, but not clean execution at home to go into the half. And then CJ also said, hey, I can't just be a decoy when we're in what I'm calling the love cat formation and I'm out there flanked out. I need to block. And maybe if I'd blocked when Jeremiah bounced that 4th and 1 outside, maybe he would have picked up the first down. That's pretty debatable. And I think you have some great thoughts on that about getting cute in 4th and short situations, especially when you basically make it 10 on 11 offense and you have the best running back in America.
Yeah, I think it was, that second half, they're go for it on 4th down. I understand wanting to get Jeremiah Love the ball in some creative ways and running the Wildcat, but I also think if it's 4th and 1, and last year I think in those type of instances, they'd be like, we're better than you, we're more physical than you, we have the better running back or quarterback, or in that instance, we're going to count on them to like make a play. Sometimes it's just like you're getting a little cute, you're bouncing outside, like just take your offensive line and show you have the confidence to go win that battle and we're the better team. And I feel like if that's not your mentality, the way Notre Dame likes to play in that aggressiveness, then you should just punt the ball. And this was honestly one of James Rendell's best games. I think you could have put the ball in his hands. You mentioned this off air, kind of pin them deep again, and that you found a lot of success there. I just think if you're not going to go in with that mentality, then you should just play it a little safer, honestly.
Yeah, if you're Notre Dame, that's a great point by you, Drew. If you're Notre Dame and your brand under Marcus Freeman is, quote, offensive line and defensive line driven program, and you're going to out physical people, nobody's ever going to be tougher than you, then you sort of go with the finesse play on 4th and short. And look, like defenses are good. That's a great A&M coaching staff, especially with Mike Elko in charge of the defense. You can't run the same thing against them every time. They're also going to make adjustments and look to load the box and not let you just run it straight at them. But again, when you're in that Wildcat and you're basically playing 10 on 11 against an SEC defense that you've talked about being very talented, I'm not sure that's your best option there. And for C.J. Carr, not just another very nice night for him. He distributed the ball very well, Drew. 7 different receivers caught passes. 6 of the 7 had 2 or more catches. But as Chris Pate says, the season's over. No way do the Irish deserve to be in the playoffs. Chris Ash, something along those lines as well. And look, you're right. I said it. I said it on the Football Scoop podcast this week. If Notre Dame starts 0-2, it's very difficult not to feel like their season is over. Marcus Freeman said after the Miami loss, everything we want to accomplish is still in front of us. He was asked tonight, without a conference, is everything you want to accomplish still in front of you? And he didn't have much to say about it other than we just got to focus on getting better right now. Well, that's true, but you also can't ignore the big picture because this is a big picture era of college football. I think those were probably my primary notes. But as we digest this, Drew, I find it unbelievable that Notre Dame has now allowed 20 TFLs in its last 3 games and now scored by combined 28-0 in the middle 8. Those are elements that Notre Dame built its identity upon in going to the title game. Those are elements that Notre Dame has forgotten or no longer has in its DNA, and now it's a loser of 3 consecutive games.
Yeah, and to those points, like we could spend another 20 minutes kind of ranting off the mistakes and things they cleaned up, and they still lost by 4 combined points in these first 2 games. So it wouldn't have taken that much more for them to potentially be 2-0, but it took, as I kind of started off with, like a litany of mistakes and just uncharacteristic things you don't expect from this program after what we saw last year to kind of get them to this point. And I'm not totally sure. I'm sure maybe the coaching staff isn't totally sure right now how they clean those up to get potentially 10-0 and get to where they might want to be, which again, I don't think even if they go 10-0, they're guaranteed anything. So
Yeah, great point. And again, I think you're right. Like we could look at so many things, and I do encourage everyone either to look at my Twitter feed at John D. Bryce One or look at the Irish Illustrated staff Twitter feed or the retweets. That last play of the game where Donovan Heinisch is flat out tackled from behind by Chase Basantis, the left guard for the Aggies. How that play is missed, I'm not sure. This was an SEC crew because Notre Dame, I believe, had an ACC crew at the game in College Station last year, and a little bit of a surprising move. Greg Sankey wasn't at the Tennessee-Georgia game today in Knoxville, which was a ranked showdown between 2 SEC teams. He was here in South Bend tonight at this game. So an SEC crew, the SEC commissioner sees Texas A&M get undoubtedly its biggest win to date under second-year coach Mike Elko, among the more damaging losses to date for fourth-year Notre Dame coach Marcus Freeman. Any other thoughts before we wrap the show, Drew?
just kind of on that big win for Texas A&M, and maybe even more heartbreaking for Notre Dame. This is Texas A&M's first road win against a top 10 team since 2014, and their first non-conference top 10 road win since 1979. So Texas A&M had not been winning this type of game, in some instances for almost 45, 50 years. And they kind of got it done against Notre Dame because of so many self-inflicted wounds.
Yep, and Marcus Freeman had been good against the SEC. Remember, he'd already beaten South Carolina, Texas A&M, and Georgia along the way since taking over the program. But that's difficult. I did see one question I want to get to. I think it was Gino that said, talk about the targeting call, fellas. And by the book, when I first heard they're going to review this for targeting, I was like, how on earth are you reviewing this for targeting? When you watch the slow motion replay or when you really watch the full speed replay, what really doomed Don Schuler in that instance wasn't that he got low, it's that he completely dipped his head and led with his head into the ball carrier. He was not going to hurt Marcel Reed like that. That interpretation of the rule, that element of it, is specifically designed for player safety. And it was a night where we had already seen a player with an apparent neck injury be stretchered off the field. But by the book, and Marcus Freeman said it, he described it as he lowered his head, led with his head into the ball carrier. Marcus said, by textbook definition, that is targeting. Did I have a different point of view? I probably did. But by the textbook definition, it's targeting when you see the replay. If Don Schuler just drops and keeps his head up, he's completely fine. It's when he drops and leads with his head. It doomed him after they took the time to replay.
Yeah, I agree. I once they started reviewing it and showed it, I kind of had a similar reaction where it's like the crown of his helmet is what was leading, and it almost seemed a little bit like he tried to avoid him at the end and went extra low. So I get why people might be upset by it, but I agree. As soon as I saw it, I was like, I turned to Tim O'Malley, who I was sitting next to, and I was like, I think there's a decent chance they're going to call this targeting, just because when they see that crown of the head in it, and it also resulted in Marcel Reed going down for a little bit, having to come, the trainers come on the field. Like, I just kind of saw it as something that they were probably going to consider. So it's unfortunate for Notre Dame. I don't think it's the most egregious play I've seen from a player who ended up getting ejected or anything like that. But it definitely is something that I don't think that's something that people should maybe hang their hat on as like a way Notre Dame got taken advantage of or anything like that.
Yeah, no, of some obvious bad calls in this game. I can't really pinpoint that as one of them. And Don Schuler, both because he had been active and because there were too much action in the secondary, had 7 tackles in the game, led Notre Dame with 7 tackles despite that. But again, we're sitting here wrapping up our show after Notre Dame blows 2 different double-digit leads in the first half at home, something we just don't see. We see Notre Dame beaten in the Middle 8 again, And I should note, as we discussed the Don Schuler ejection, that means he'll have to sit the first half next week against Purdue. Notre Dame hosts the Boilermakers, still seeking their first win. Purdue also trying to get its footing right under first-year coach Barry Odom. They played pretty valiantly against USC tonight. I think ended up losing that game 33-17.
Yes.
They're going to be vastly undermanned against Notre Dame, but they're playing very hard for the new first-year coach, and they're not remotely as dreadful as that Purdue team that was annihilated last year by Notre Dame. So that's it for this edition of our Irish Illustrated Overtime Live. Again, for our producer, Tom Zwiller, for Drew Mintuck of Irish Illustrated, for myself, John Bryce of Football Scoop and IrishIllustrated.com. This has been Irish Illustrated Overtime. We'll have a full podcast, Irish Illustrated Podcast Insider, Monday afternoon after Marcus Freeman meets with the media. Until then, enjoy as best you can the rest of your weekend, and thanks so much for tuning in.